Well, hey, good morning. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Of course, I have got my cup of coffee with me this morning. That's why we call this Coffee with PC. I also usually bring my Bible and a few notes to remind me what we're doing. And we have bitten off a pretty big project, trying to see kind of the flow and the story that the Bible is telling us. A remarkable book, the Bible. I spent my life studying it and just love it and learn from it all the time. And I hope you're learning some things as we do this too. We are talking today, and where we've been the last few weeks, about the Exodus. So the Exodus is God's deliverance of the children of Israel out of bondage in Egypt, and we've seen God miraculously do that with the Passover. He's parted the Red Sea. He's taken them by the path, and he leads them to Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is a hugely important place in the history of Israel because that is where God gives his people the law. Also called the Torah. We call the first 5 books of the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible, the Torah. Torah means the law, and it's what God reveals of himself to his people. Probably the most well-known part of the law is in Exodus chapter 20. We call it the 10 Commandments. But the 10 Commandments are really just the tip of the iceberg, because as the Jewish people look at the law and the Torah, they number over 613 commandments in the law, to be exact. I have problems with those first 10. I can't even keep those all the time, much less over 600 commandments. And if you've been around church, we talk a lot about the law. If you've been in church your whole life, you hear about the law and God's law and sin by breaking God's law and how all of that works. But we are in a place today that there's a verse that jumps out at me, and it's jumped out at me for a couple years, but I wanted to point it out to you. Maybe you've heard me say this before, but it's in, Exodus chapter 25, verse 8. And in chapter 25, Moses is getting the instructions for building what will be the tabernacle. It will be this place of worship for the people of Israel. And there are very detailed instructions about the size of it and the materials that you're supposed to make up the outer wall and then the inner court and then the furnishings that go in it. There are so many specific instructions here in the book of Exodus about this. And a big part of this tabernacle, and a key part of it, will be an altar of sacrifice. And on that altar of sacrifice, regularly, daily, the people of Israel will be instructed to make sacrifices. And one of the reasons they will need to make sacrifices is because they don't keep all 613 of those commandments. Part of the function of sacrifice is provided to the people of Israel to receive forgiveness for when they break the 613 commandments. It is remarkable. But beyond that, and beyond a lot of times what we talk about in church world about sin and separation from God, this verse in Exodus 25 really drives home an important point that I think the whole Bible also drives home if you look at the big picture. It's in Exodus 25, verse 8, God's instructions to his people, the Lord who has appeared to them, their covenant God, says, "Then have them make a sanctuary for me." That's the tabernacle we're talking about. But listen to this. "And I will dwell among them." God says part of the reason, and maybe the main reason he wants them to build this sanctuary, this tabernacle for him, is so that he can dwell among them. Now, sometimes in church world, when we talk about sin, which is important, and we talk about breaking God's commandments, which is important, the implication can be that God is this angry God who is far away because our sin has pushed us so far away from him, and there's just a part of him that just, he can't wait to punish us. And there is kind of, if we're not careful, this undercurrent to our view of God that can come out of that, which is why I think this verse is so important. Because by the time we get to Exodus 25, the people of Israel have already messed up plenty. We've looked at in Genesis, in the first part of Exodus, times where God's people have broken his commandments royally badly. I mean, they have messed up big time. And one of the messages that is an undercurrent of the scripture is God is consistently pursuing his people, pursuing humanity in spite of the fact that we so often sin and break his commandment. I'm really grateful to Tara Lee Cobble. This year in my Bible reading, I'm doing something called the Bible Recap, and she kind of puts it together. It's a daily reading where in a year you get through the whole Bible, and there's a little video kind of summary every day about what you've read. And one of the things she says is exactly to this point, that it's easy to think that as we read the Bible and we talk and we think about sin as it's talked about in churches, that God just runs away from it. But the story of the Bible is the opposite, that in spite of our sin, God moves toward us. Think about from the very beginning, the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve sinned. They run away from God, but where is God? He's walking, looking for them. Where are you? He comes seeking them out, even though they've broken his law about eating that fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Here we have the children of Israel who make mistake after mistake, sin after sin. Their whole backstory is one of sin. And God here says, I want to build a tabernacle. And yes, it's going to have an altar. It's going to have sacrifice. It's going to have a holy of holies. But it's going to have that so I can be among you. The movement of God is toward his people. He's not running away from them. He's coming toward them and making a way. In fact, the reason all of that tabernacle furnishings, including that altar of sacrifice, is there is so that his people have a way to be restored to him. That he's right there in their midst and he wants to be restored to them. We can trace that all the way. And one of the ways I've tried to point out as we've gone through this is how consistently all of these things hint at, if not point directly to, Jesus. And one of the things the Bible tells us, John's account of the life of Jesus, John chapter 1, he calls Jesus the Word. And he says specifically, the Word became flesh in John 1:14 and dwelt among us. And that word dwelt is the word tabernacle. It's the Greek equivalent of the word tabernacle. The Word became flesh and tabernacled where? Among us. God says here in Exodus 25, I want to be among you. In Jesus, God tabernacles among us. In fact, one of the names we have for Jesus is Emmanuel, which means God with us. And if you go to the very end of the story, the movement of God is toward humanity, because we find at the end that there's this beautiful city, the holy city, the New Jerusalem. And notice the movement is coming down out of heaven toward the earth. And the voice from the throne says, now the dwelling of God is with men. The movement of God is toward humanity. Yes, sin is a reality, and the 613 commands that are here and the other things that we could look at elsewhere in the scriptures are important. And sin does cause a break in our relationship with God. It separates us from God, sometimes we say. But God doesn't run away. God doesn't ignore us. God pursues us in his love. He desires to be with us. He desires to be among us. And one day in his eternal kingdom, heaven will come down and heaven and earth will be reunited as it was intended in the garden. And you will be my people and I will be your God. God will be among us. The story of the Bible is God's movement toward humanity, even when we move away from him. God demonstrates his love, Paul says in Romans, for us in this, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. While I had no use for God, God acted in history to provide for my salvation. The movement of God is toward humanity. And here in the Hebrew Bible, in the book of Exodus, God says, build me that tabernacle because I want to be right there among you. God's movement is toward us, and he's made provision through the sacrificial system that was fully, finally, and completely fulfilled in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, so that all who place their faith in him can have their relationship with God, their Creator, restored. It is a beautiful story, this pursuing, loving, gracious, and forgiving God that comes after us and time and again makes provision so that we can be forgiven and be his people. I think it is one of the key threads that holds the whole story of the Bible together. And I hope you'll come to love that thread as much as I do, as you come to know the grace and mercy of God through Jesus Christ. Well, As I say, that's kind of the message we preach pretty consistently around here. We want people to have a relationship with God, to be restored to right relationship with God, to grow in that relationship with God. That's why we get together. That's why I do these Wednesday chats. That's why we have worship on Sunday morning. That's why we do all that we do as a church, so that together we can learn what it means to be God's people and grow closer to Him as He moves in history toward us. We'd love to have you be a part of that journey with us. Sundays, 9 a.m., we'll be here talking about that very thing. If you're in town, love to have you with us. And of course, next Wednesday, we'll catch up and we'll take the next step as we meander through this story of the Bible to see this thread of God's grace and forgiveness and mercy everywhere on every page of this book. It is a beautiful thing. I will leave you with that. I will finish my coffee. I will get back to the rest of my day. And I hope to see you maybe in worship, and if not, next Wednesday. Take care.